The Prophecy. Written and narrated by Althea Little. Chapter 7. The next day, Amelia sat at the small table off of her parents' kitchen. She and Osric decided that they would talk to their parents separately and then reconvene to see if the deal was truly going to happen. Her mother sat down a plate of sandwiches cut into small triangles. "Do you need anything with your tea, dear?" she asked. "Milk and sugar, but I can get that." Her mother shooed away her attempts at helping, nodding pointedly to her usual chair. Amelia sighed and took her seat. Placing a sandwich on her plate, she smiled a little. Having her mother fuss over her gave her some hope that this scheme would actually work. Perhaps Osric had been right, and her parents' main issue was that she and Osric hadn't tried to make the relationship work, and once they saw that the two of them were not meant to be together, they'd let it go. "How are things at work, Amelia?" her father asked. Picking up a few of the sandwiches, he put one on his plate and one on his wife's. It was always like this, her father taking care of her mother and vice versa. They may not have always been the perfect parents or perfect spouses, but they always cared. Amelia wanted more than anything to have a relationship like that one day. "Good. It's been a little slow now that winter is over, but I have a feeling that once the heat rises, we'll be getting plenty of farmers and laborers coming in more frequently." Her father nodded in understanding. "Working in the heat is no easy task." "No, it is not," her mother agreed, setting a small pitcher of milk and a bowl of sugar on the table. Amelia had to hide her smile. Her parents never worked a day in the heat, but that didn't stop them from sympathizing. Everyone was quiet for a moment while they fixed their tea to their liking and started in on the sandwiches. Once her stomach was no longer growling, she looked at her parents. "I had something I wanted to discuss," she said, her heart thumping a bit harder than usual. "I had a feeling you might," her mother said, looking at her uncertainly. "What is it, dear?" "Here went nothing." "Well, Osric and I have been talking." Her mother perked up. Her father was harder to read. He just looked at her, waiting for her to continue. We've decided to date." Her mother gasped and gripped her husband's arm. A smile stretched wide across her beautiful face. Amelia held her hands up. "Wait! We're not sure it's going to work out between us. There's a lot of bad history there, you know." "A lot of good history, too," her mother reminded. "The point is, we've heard your concerns and we're willing to give it a try, but only for a month." Her mother's eyebrows drew together. "A month? That's not nearly enough time." "We'll be seeing each other 3 times a week," Amelia said, exasperated. "Surely that's enough time to become reacquainted." "There's one more thing," she hesitated. Here was the moment of truth, the only reason she decided to take on this idiotic deal. "If it doesn't work out, I need you both to promise that you will let go of the idea of this prophecy and allow me to date whomever I wish." Her parents looked at each other for a while, holding the kind of secret conversation that only people who have known each other for a long time can hold. They looked concerned. Amelia held her breath, waiting for the verdict. Would they agree to this, or would they shut her down? Her mother nodded and turned to face Amelia. "We will let it go." Amelia's heart leapt in her chest. "But only if you two spend every day together for the next month, at least a few hours a day." Amelia's mouth nearly dropped to the floor. Every day? A few hours? That was ridiculous! Impossible, even! She opened her mouth to argue, but her mother cut her off. "No exceptions, Amelia. We will be able to let this go much easier knowing that you and Osric tried. But only seeing each other a few times a week for 1 month is not enough time. If you'd like, you can meet 3 times a week for 3 months." Her mother almost seemed hopeful that that's what she would choose. But Amelia looked at this whole situation like a band-aid that just needed to be ripped off. 1 month in exchange for the rest of her life. She could do this. "I'll talk to Osric," she relented, "but I'm not sure what his schedule looks like." Her mother took a sip of tea, but not before she saw a smile playing on her lips. Amelia took a sip of her own tea. On the outside, she smiled. On the inside, she wanted to hang her head in defeat. Every day for 1 month. What a nightmare. Osric stood outside of Amelia's house and knocked on the door. He was exhausted from a day on duty, but part of him was excited to be here, excited that this deal was actually happening. It was their first official day of dating. They had met back at the cafe after she met with her parents yesterday. He hadn't even spoken to his parents about it. There was no point. Thankfully, she went first with her news that her parents wanted them to meet every day for a month. He smiled to himself as he recalled how pissed she had looked about it. She was adorable when she was angry. He, on the other hand, hadn't been too upset by the development. Sure, it was a little inconvenient, but he found himself wanting to spend time with her, to change her mind about who he was. When she had asked, he had said that his parents came to the same conclusion as her parents, and they decided that they would start the clock today. Since they had to meet for a few hours, he had to come over right when they both got off of work. Amelia had insisted that they use her house to meet at. He wasn't sure why. She probably wanted home field advantage. He had agreed, but he planned to see if he could push her to go out and about with him every chance he got. The door opened a crack, and Osric stared at it for a moment. Was he supposed to let himself in, or... Going for it, he used his foot to push the door the rest of the way open. Amelia was already a few steps away, walking away from the door with her nose in a book. "Come in," she said, without breaking stride or looking over her shoulder. He drew his brows together. Is this really how she treated her guests? Probably not. This was probably special treatment just for him. He sighed and closed the door behind him. Oh well, at least it gave him an opportunity to look around without her scrutinizing him. Her house was very small but cozy. There was a warmth to it that felt inviting, even if its mistress seemed less than excited to invite him in. The front door opened directly into the living room. Unsurprisingly, there were plants everywhere. Some plants rested in large pots on the floor. Others hung from the ceiling, their long vines draping across random objects. And still more could be found on the fireplace mantel and on the coffee table next to a stack of books. Amelia settled herself into a comfortable-looking chair on one side of the coffee table. There was another just like it beside hers, and a love seat sitting right across from them. He wondered if she always chose to sit in the chair, or if she had purposely chosen it today so he couldn't sit next to her. It didn't matter. He didn't plan on sitting right now anyway. With her nose in that book, he didn't feel so bad snooping around her living room to satisfy his curiosity about her. He made his way to the fireplace mantel where some of the books were lined up. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. She was looking at him. He smiled a little, but continued investigating. There were books on potions, one on history of healing magic, a book on common herbs and spices, and... He paused, looking at the title again. The Ice Duke. A romance. A very interesting-looking romance, judging by the image drawn on the spine. He tilted his head to get a better look. "What are you doing, Osric?" she asked, sounding annoyed. He turned and flashed her a grin. "Just looking for something to do, since you seem intent on ignoring me in favor of that book." Turning back to the books, he plucked the romance from the others. "This book looks pretty interesting. What's it about?" He began flipping through the pages. She shot out of her chair and snatched the book from his hands. "Please don't touch my things." Her cheeks burned. "You know, getting to know you would be much easier if you just talked to me." He hoped that came out casual or teasing and not desperate. "You don't need to get to know me. We aren't really dating." She placed the book back on the mantel and then returned to her seat. She glared at him before bringing the book back up to cover her face. He took a seat on the love seat, spreading out to get comfortable. He had a feeling this was going to be a long few hours. "I disagree," he said. I think we should get to know each other. What if I run into your mom at the market and she asks me questions about you? It wouldn't be very convincing if I couldn't answer those questions, now would it? She glared at him over her book before sighing and placing it on her lap, her finger resting between the pages to keep her place. Fine. What do you want to know? His eyes brightened. What didn't he want to know? Her response seemed like an open invitation to ask her anything, but he knew that he would have to play this carefully. Ask her something that wouldn't seem too intrusive. Maybe he could get answers to his other questions later. Well, maybe not all of his other questions. He doubted she'd be willing to let him find out what her lips tasted like, or how they felt against his. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees, and covered his mouth with his fisted hands. He licked his lips, trying to get rid of the phantom feeling of her lips on his. Focus, he told himself. He nodded to the book on her lap. What are you researching? That's the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. If you would like to read the story without narration or would like to follow along, head over to www.wattpad.com/user/Althea_little. New chapters are added every Wednesday, so be sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you like this chapter, give it a thumbs up and consider buying me a coffee, linked in the description. All donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, stay magical.